So we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, and Lamar Waldron has a new book out about it, The Hidden History of the JFK Assassination.com is the website. The book, of course, is of that title. And Lamar, welcome back.
Great to be back with you, Tom.
So we have established that this mafia boss, Carlos Marcello, was largely responsible for this assassination, that he brought in the shooters, that he hit him at Joe Campisi's restaurant, that Jack Ruby was involved, that, et cetera. Okay, we're up to this point.
And that, again, I want to emphasize that the CIA people that were working for and with Marcello were critical to allowing these mob bosses to kill JFK in a way that would force high U.S. government officials, including Robert Kennedy, to cover up important facts about JFK's murder at the time, not just then, but for months, years, even decades to follow.
Right. And so the question that everybody always asks, who is Lee Harvey Oswald?
Well,
and what was his role?
Well, Lee Harvey Oswald, when you look at him in isolation, he can look very suspicious, right? But your listeners should ask themselves. So the Warren Commission no one's ever come up with a motivation for Oswald. Anything you ever read in a book or see in a movie or see on TV is just made up.
Well, there's the picture of him with the rifle and the two socialist newspapers.
Sure, and the Warren Commission, the best they could do for motivation was say, well, he was a communist Marxist from the time he was a teenager, so his Marxist ideology must have been why he killed JFK. Right. But your listeners should ask themselves, in the 1950s, even if you weren't old enough, if you've read about the 1950s, pretty conservative time, right? McCarthy, Vice President Nixon. Well, how many teenage communists were joining the United States Marines in the 1950s? He had joined the Civil Air Patrol first, not only joined the U.S. Marines, he wanted to join the Marines so badly, he tried to join before he was even old enough. And get this, once he was in the United States Marines, he walked around spouting a love of everything Russian, so much during the height of the Cold War that his fellow Marines called him Oswaldskevich. And yet, even when he was stationed at the U-2 spy plane base of the CIA's in Japan, guess how many times his Marine sergeants ever wrote him up for spouting his love of all things Russian?
Zero.
Exactly.
In other words, Oswald was our guy who was going to infiltrate on behalf of the CIA, was going to infiltrate Russia.
Right, and he was one of 6 young men that went over there around the same time. 5 of them came back around the same time, those 5 with Russian wives. And as we were able to find out, naval intelligence was monitoring Oswald the whole time because he was their man. They wanted to see how the KGB in America would try to recruit Lee Harvey Oswald.
Okay, so he was working for naval intelligence, not the CIA.
Exactly. Well, naval intelligence and the CIA, because remember, the CIA had that U-2 base. So when he was recruited, it was naval intelligence and the CIA.
And John Tower helped him come back.
And so Oswald is back in America. He's the KGB. They're too smart. They realize he's some sort of a plant. They don't try to recruit him. So eventually he gets involved with a couple of associates of Marcello, who were also working for the CIA, in low-level Cuban operations. So the day of the assassination, Oswald thinks he's trying to get to Cuba. Now, again, when you look at Oswald in isolation, he can look suspicious. But many of your listeners, not all, don't realize JFK was almost killed in Chicago during his motorcade there 3 weeks before Dallas. That motorcade was in such danger, JFK had to cancel his entire trip. An ex-Marine in Chicago, with a lot of parallels to Oswald, was actually arrested that morning, and he worked at a tall warehouse overlooking JFK's motorcade route. And he was arrested with a carload of weapons. Then JFK was almost killed in Tampa, Florida. You and I were the first people to discover that attempt after going through, remember all those thousands of pages of newspaper microfilm we went through?
I spent hours and hours staring at microfilm.
We spent hours, and we finally found the one little article that slipped out the day after JFK died that said, 4 days ago when JFK was on November the 18th, this is the 50th anniversary of that, JFK was almost killed in Tampa. And I talked to the Tampa chief of police. He said, we told JFK, you got to cancel your motorcade. We can't protect you. JFK went ahead with it. Well, there was a Tampa suspect, Fair Play for Cuba Committee associate by the name of Gilberto Lopez. And he had more than a dozen parallels to Oswald. So what we see here is not 3 plans to kill JFK, 1 plan, 3 cities, 3 different men who would have been the patsy for it. And Marcello, to Jack Van Landingham, admitted meeting Lee Harvey Oswald. But what we have to realize is Marcello was part of the CIA mafia plots to kill Fidel Castro. On a very low level, Lee Harvey Oswald was part of that same plotting. The day of the assassination, he thought he was going to Mexico, and from Mexico he could get into Cuba as part of his being a low-level U.S. intelligence asset. Now, what the mafia was able to do with the help of their CIA associates like Morales, Bernard Barker, and John Martino is to plant phony evidence pointing at Fidel Castro. And that phony evidence convinced Lyndon Johnson, convinced JFK's CIA director, convinced people working on those Cuban operations like Alexander Haig, who later on became Reagan's Secretary of State, and even today, Secretary of State John Kerry, and I'm a big admirer of John Kerry. Hey, I voted for him. Think how great the country would have been if he'd been elected. But John Kerry has said three things on television recently. He said, number one, he believed in a conspiracy that killed JFK. Very, very brave thing for any official to say, right, Tom?
Yeah, especially Secretary of State.
Right, a sitting Secretary of State say that. That's rare. Unfortunately, he did indicate, and you can see this on NBC Friday night when they're going to play the entire clip, but it's been played on the news even now. He kind of points the finger at Cuba as somehow being involved in JFK's murder. Now, again, give John Kerry credit. He says, look, I haven't looked into this a whole lot, but he sort of implies that Cuba was somehow behind Oswald's action. Well, the House Select Committee on Assassination looked into Cuba and Castro, and they determined Castro was not involved in the assassination, and a lot of the evidence, in fact, all the evidence implicating Fidel was discredited by the CIA and by the FBI back in 1964. Mm. What we also show in this new book, what I'm able to show now is that phony evidence can all be traced to those three mob bosses who confessed and their associates in the CIA who also made credible confession. Mm. But look at what we're faced with today is we have this Cold War with Cuba. And our relations with Cuba have been frozen like a block of ice since JFK's murder. And it's now clear that the reason that we're still enemies with Cuba on a country-to-country basis, when we've made peace, America's made peace with former enemies like Vietnam, former enemies like China, who fought us during the Korean War, but we haven't made peace with Cuba, and we don't have trade with Cuba. And your listeners, even when it's really cold in the winter, they can't jet down to Cuba and lay on a nice beach because high U.S. officials from LBJ to John Kerry have erroneously believed that phony evidence planted by the mafia and their CIA allies
Castro
back in
Kennedy.
1963.
Yeah.
That's correct.
So back to the question, who was Oswald? You answered that. What role did he play on November 22nd?
Well, again, according to Marcello in prison, he had two professional hitmen to come over and shoot JFK. They're not going to use someone like Oswald. When Oswald was in the Marines, some of your listeners may hear Oswald called a marksman sometime. That makes him sound like a crack shot, a good sniper, right?
That's something every Marine has to do. You have to get your marksmanship.
It's the lowest. Marksman is the lowest of three levels and includes things like sharpshooter and stuff. And when Oswald was in the Marines and practicing regularly, he would sometimes not just miss the bullseye, but the entire target. So there's no way.
Oh, Jesse Ventura tried to recreate the shot, and he actually is a professional shooter, Navy SEAL. He couldn't do it.
Right. And no one's ever really been able to, on the first try, ever recreate that shooting. So Oswald, like I say, he would miss the entire target sometimes when he was practicing. So
So Oswald was sitting in the cafeteria, according to a police officer who was there and a couple of other people. He actually was sitting in the cafeteria. He actually was the patsy.
Well, he was encountered just seconds after the assassination. Now there's evidence that's in the book. It's in several books, but it's pretty new evidence that shows that if Oswald had been on the 6th floor where the so-called sniper's nest is, he would have had to have gone down a stairwell because the power was off and the elevators weren't working. Now there are two female witnesses, one who talked to authorities at the time who were on that stairwell, and they didn't see Oswald. So you're right. Oswald was exactly where he said he was. He was in that lunchroom. He was near a payphone. He was waiting to make or receive a call about going to the Texas Theater. John Martino, the CIA asset who also worked for Trafficante, when he confessed, he said Oswald was supposed to meet his contact that day in the Texas Theater. He would have been taken out of the country, not to get to Mexico and to Cuba, but he would have been killed. But it was important to have him to blame for the assassination. Because
so he was literally the patsy.
He was literally the patsy. And the mob, Marcello and Trafficante, knew they had to have that, because when they had assassinated the Attorney General-elect of Alabama in 1954, they didn't have a patsy. And Eisenhower, in a rare move against organized crime, called out the National Guard to go into the little city, Phoenix City, Alabama, where the mob had assassinated the Attorney General-elect of Alabama, which, by the way, there is a myth that says the mob doesn't kill government officials, and that's true for some mob families, but for Marcello's Mafia, Trafficante's Mafia, and the Chicago Mafia.
Well, and this was, I mean, the way the mob kills people is, like Albert Anastasia. I mean, they do it publicly, and they do it with guns. If the CIA wanted Jack Kennedy dead, he would have just not woken up one day. I mean, logic would indicate.
He was totally killed gangland style. But, but I have to say, there is hope for your listeners, and when we come back, we'll tell them.
And Danielle and Shano are going to do the last 15 minutes of the show here and ask you that, because I got to run to a TV studio. So thank you, Lamar. I'm going to put you on hold here. The Hidden History of the JFK Assassination.com is the website. The Hidden History is the book. We'll be back.